On January 28, 1986, 7 astronauts climbed aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger in front of a live television audience of millions. Among them was Christa McAuliffe, a schoolteacher chosen from over 10,000 applicants to become the first ordinary citizen in space. Classrooms across America tuned in live to watch her launch. 73 seconds later, Challenger broke apart in the sky. All 7 crew members tragically died. Here's the part most people don't know. This wasn't a freak accident. This wasn't a risk nobody saw coming. Engineers warned NASA the night before launch, in explicit, urgent terms, that this exact failure could happen. They were overruled, and the following morning, the world watched it happen live. This is the story of how a warning became a footnote, and a footnote became a tragedy. Let's set the stage. By 1986, NASA's Space Shuttle program was a source of national pride. Reagan was set to reference the mission in his State of the Union address that very night. NASA was under enormous pressure. Funding depended on proving the shuttle could fly reliably, on a schedule like clockwork. This particular launch had already been delayed multiple times. Another delay would mean more bad press, more doubt, more scrutiny. The night before launch, temperatures at the Florida launch site were forecast to drop into the low 20s, dramatically colder than any previous shuttle launch. And a group of engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, knew exactly why that mattered. The boosters were sealed with rubber O-rings, critical components designed to contain superheated gas during launch. Engineer Roger Boisjoly had been warning for months that these O-rings lost their flexibility in cold temperatures. Cold rubber doesn't seal properly, and an improperly sealed joint on a rocket booster isn't a minor issue. It's catastrophic. On the night of January 27th, Thiokol engineers held an emergency conference call with NASA officials. Boisjoly and his colleagues laid out their data. They recommended, in no uncertain terms, that Challenger should not launch below 53 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest temperature any shuttle had previously launched at. The forecast for the next morning was 26 degrees, nearly 30 degrees colder than their own safety threshold. NASA managers pushed back. They asked Thiokol to prove it was unsafe to fly, rather than prove it was safe. That's backwards from how safety engineering is supposed to work, but under schedule pressure, it's exactly what happened. Thiokol's own management, facing pressure from a major client, ultimately reversed their engineers' recommendation. They told NASA it was safe to launch. Boisjoly later describing taking off his engineer's hat and putting on a management hat, a decision made by executives, not by the people who understood the actual physics of the O-rings. The next morning, January 28, the temperature at launch was 26 degrees. Ice had formed on the launch tower overnight. Engineers who'd raised the alarm watched the countdown from a conference room, believing they were about to witness a disaster in real time. At 73 seconds after liftoff, a puff of dark smoke appeared exactly where the O-ring seal had failed. Hot gas escaped exactly where they said it would. The booster's structural support failed. Challenger disintegrated in the sky over the Atlantic Ocean, in full view of the launch site, in full view of Christa McAuliffe's own students, in full view of the entire country watching live. The Rogers Commission investigation that followed confirmed it in devastating detail. This wasn't a mystery. This wasn't an unforeseeable flaw. Physicist Richard Feynman, brought in to investigate, famously demonstrated the O-ring's cold temperature failure live in a press conference, using nothing but a clamp, a piece of rubber, and a glass of ice water. The failure was that simple to prove, and it had already been proven the night before by the engineers who built the part. Here's why this story still matters. Nearly 40 years later, the Challenger disaster isn't really a story about faulty rubber. It's a story about what happens when a warning gets filtered through layers of schedule pressure, reputation, and the desire to avoid any uncomfortable conversation. Nobody at NASA wanted Challenger to explode. Nobody chose that outcome. What they chose, again and again, in small incremental steps, was to prioritize the launch date over the data in front of them. This pattern doesn't just live in aerospace disasters. It lives in every organization where the person with the concerning data isn't the person with the final say. It's the employee who flags a problem and gets told to find a workaround. It's the engineer who says, "Not yet," and gets overruled by a deadline. The tragedy of Challenger wasn't a lack of information. Everyone who needed to know knew. The tragedy was what happened between the knowing and the deciding. NASA changed dramatically after Challenger. New safety protocols, an independent office for raising engineering concerns without being overruled by schedule pressure. It took 7 lives, watched live by the entire country, to force that change. The lesson isn't really about rockets. It's about what it costs when the people closest to a problem are the last people believed. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe, because next week we're covering another interesting piece of history that'll make you question everything you thought you knew.